Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. My name is LaCorey Meadows and I serve as a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. It is such a pleasure to see each of you in the room today. So today we have a really exciting forum in store for us. CMC presents Bridges Out of Poverty and is sponsored by the Thomas B. Fordham Institute and represented by friends and associates in our audience today. Please join me in thanking them for their sponsorship. And last but not least, please join me in welcoming Chad Aldis, Vice President of the Ohio Policy and Advocacy at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Chad, it's all yours.
Thank you, LaCorey. As she said, I'm Chad Aldis with the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. We are proud to support the mission of the Columbus Metropolitan Club as it convenes weekly public conversations on important community topics. The Fordham Institute, through our research, analysis, commentary, and advocacy, promotes educational excellence for every child in the state. We're committed to seeing that all students, especially the state's neediest, have the opportunity to reach their potential. Whether you're looking at news stories, research, or just making casual observations, it's all too apparent that poverty is both pervasive and stubborn. Is this an education problem, a societal failure, or something else? To those in poverty, the opportunities to escape are often either daunting or so obscure to appear non-existent. We need ideas and solutions. Let's explore these issues with our experts today. Please welcome author of Bridges Out of Poverty, Phil DeVol, author of I knew I was going to get it wrong, but it didn't help. Author of Sociopsychonomics, Lawrence Funderburke. And our host, CEO of the United Way of Central Ohio, Lisa Courtice. Lisa, the podium is yours.
Great. It's not uncommon to describe Columbus as a tale of two cities. For 2/3 of Franklin County residents, creating and sustaining pathways to a quality, affordable lifestyle is in reach. Unfortunately, for 1/3 of our community, they struggle to create this pathway. Poverty levels are stubbornly high and have not returned to pre-Great Recession levels. We are at full employment. For those of us for whom it is easy to work, we're working. 205,000 or 17% of people in Franklin County live below the federal poverty level. That means if you're a family of 4, you earn about $25,000. If that's not bad enough, another 200,000 live at 200% of poverty or below. Often referred to as the working poor, many of these people, our neighbors, find themselves holding multiple jobs and are unable to make ends meet without seeking the support of the community's safety net. Columbus is the least economically diverse large city in the United States and the second most economically segregated American city, following Austin, Texas. So what does it mean when a strong economy alone is not moving people out of poverty? And what is the most effective call to action? We're fortunate to have 2 authors, thought leaders, and individuals with us today who are passionate about creating bridges out of poverty. So let me ask them first to introduce their books, because we want to make certain we get that done. And Lawrence has created a new word, so he's going to share with you the new word.
Yeah, sociopsychonomics is really a play on socioeconomics, and I think all of us are familiar with socioeconomics, but what gets lost in the shuffle is the psychology behind social class and economic decisions. So it's not surprising that growing up in poverty, I grew up on the west side of Columbus in Sullivan Gardens housing projects, that social studies was my least favorite subject, because who wants to study a subject that's an indictment on your situation? Mm-hmm. It was very tough. And now, and it's probably my favorite subject, and it's ironic that I would write a book about social class, but the psychology behind how people make decisions is pretty apparent. And I think of the social classes in terms of their mindset, which is really telling. In poverty, everything's scarcity, scarce resources, scarce role models, scarce opportunities, everything's scarcity. So your lens is through a scarcity mentality. And even today, I'm not in poverty, but I still behave sometimes. And I know to my wife's chagrin over there, I still behave with some of those poverty habits. And in the middle class, it's security, right? Stable job, home ownership, secure retirement. Everything's based on security. And for the wealthy, it's seniority. They're always in control of their time, of their network, of their investments. Everything's about that. So as a financial planner, I knew that there were some key distinctions among classes. And we learn a lot about behavioral finance, but we don't really learn the why. We learn what people do, but not why they do it. And as me, I'm someone who asked a lot of questions, and I annoyed my teachers greatly as a kid, but I always wanted to know the why, and that's why I wrote this book.
And it was published at the end of last year?
End of last year.
Great. And has it made it to the dictionary yet, that word?
Not yet. Maybe,
All right,
maybe with your help, it'll be there.
All right, good. All right. Tell us about your books.
Well, for me to be here is kind of fun. I was here several years ago. I'm not sure when, but I feel like I'm coming back to report. And so I'm happy to say that things have grown a lot. The Bridges Out of Poverty is a book I wrote with Ruby Payne and Terry Drusey Smith. This came out in 1999, so it means I've been working on this since 97. And I wish I could say I was a great visionary and could have seen what would have happened and sort of made it happen. Instead, what I found was that people liked the ideas, and then they began applying them in their settings. And that means just about every sector in society is actually impacted by poverty in some way. And people were innovating and doing brilliant things, and they began to kind of, in their own communities, 3 or 4 different organizations would be using it. And then they would go, why don't we collaborate and get out of our silos and do something together? And the first time that happened was in Springfield, Ohio. And they said to me when I got there, hey, Phil, we've got a BOP steering committee. And I'm going, that's cool, what's BOP? And they go, Bridges Out of Poverty, stupid, it's your book, right? So I'm going, please don't call it BOP. I mean, well, these sort of collaboratives have just, grown across the country, and now we're in 47 states and 5 other countries, and there's hundreds of sites doing this and thousands of trainers out there training the work. And so the easy part was writing the book, and then everyone else did the heavy lifting and made good things come out of it. This book I wrote, and I refer to a lot, it's Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By World. And this is written for people who are struggling to get by, and they have a facilitator who never gets to tell them what to do. And they meet in groups of 12 around the kitchen table, and they investigate the impact that poverty has on them and their community. And a national study of this shows that it actually works for this purpose, for people that go through it to take charge of their lives. We go at this from an agenda-free point of view. People in poverty are very accustomed to being told what to do. When we were developing the version of this for reentry in the prisons in Marion, Ohio, the inmates there said there are 44 programs in this prison, and this is the first time that it's not a middle-class guy standing at the front of the room telling us what to do. We look at people in poverty as problem solvers, and that's a major mindset shift. If you think of people in poverty as the problem, that's not going to get you much. But if you see what's in people and how poverty smothers people, and you realize that all day, every day, in the insecurity that you were talking about, people have to solve those problems. And you have to do it now, and you don't have money. So it means you're reaching out to your friends, and you spend all day solving one problem after another. And when you honor people that way, and know that they bring to the table so much wisdom about the community, what we count on is for the investigators, they're called, to inform their communities about what poverty is like locally. And poverty is different in every community, in the sense that in the frontier counties in Colorado, where there's 10 people per square mile, poverty is going to feel different than it is in Appalachia or in a Native American reservation or in an urban area like this. So we need good information, and it's people who are in poverty that need to be at the table. So this is what engages them in it. And then this book is for executive directors and CEOs, the kind of people that will send their staff to a training like this, but won't go themselves.
That's true. That's a good point.
Right? Yeah. I'll give you 3 hours. Give me a short version. So I met Gene Krebs, and he introduced me to a whole bunch of, turned out to be Republican fellows at the athletic club. I didn't see any athletics taking place there. But this book is for them, you know. And what happens is the movers and shakers have the same language as the people that are working in the community, and all the institutions and organizations have the same language as people who are in poverty. And now we can have relationships and understanding across class lines. We are segregated. The wealthiest people down long driveways, gated communities, the middle class around the best schools, people in poverty not, right? We don't know each other, and this allows us to get to know each other, and that's what's happening across America as people are beginning to work together. Next step, Gene and I wrote this. This is coming out May 15th, folks, and now we think we can do policy. I wanted to avoid policy before because I didn't want bridges to get branded to the left or right, and now I know that in our communities, we can actually bring people from different political persuasions to the table, all classes, all races, all sectors. And if we care about people in poverty, we can overcome the barriers that they face using policy.
Well, I think formative experiences are really important. As you think back, what happened in your early life that defined who you are today and the decisions you made around your career and the partner that you chose to spend your life with. And for me, it was being a student during desegregation, being an elementary school student. And it defined my world, and I wanted to be involved in this space and in social justice because of that experience. So what formative experiences do you call on the most that defines your work now, Lawrence?
I think education. I mean, we all have a teacher that we remember who really inspired us and really challenged us to be better. I had a teacher, name was Miss Johnson. She was a fair-skinned African-American teacher. She had this jerry curl. My desk was right next to hers, and her jerry curls would be dripping all on my desk. And she told me, she said, Lawrence, you can be anything you want. And I've dedicated this book to educators and those who are making a difference because she never allowed me to have self-pity, to be mediocre, and she challenged me to be better than my environment. And when I was in the 3rd grade, she allowed me to come back and grade the 2nd graders' papers. And she gave me the master key to the math. So math is my favorite subject, and I tell folks, if you can't get math, you can't get life. You don't have to love math, but you certainly have to respect it. And she gave me the master key, and I was able to see that there's a pattern to success. And particularly for the poor, they're so trapped by their circumstances, they never think that they can get out. So when you work with the poor, they will tell you exactly what's going on in their brain because really, to solve a lot of the problems, you have to focus from a neurological, psychological, and nutritional perspective. And they will tell you exactly what they're thinking and what they're struggling with. But my teacher, Mrs. Johnson, many teachers, I can remember all of my teachers, they had such a profound impact on me, was never athletes. And I loved learning, and I love writing, and I love reading, and I think that's the key. You gotta get kids, because most people in poverty, they don't read. They like entertainment, but they don't read. And I know there's a good friend there, Reggie Thomas from Huntington Bank. We did a program for low-income parents, and then we were discussing college and how to go to college, and he was talking about his daughters, and he was able to get scholarships for them, full rides. And he said, they asked him, what did you do? And he said, my wife, every night, she read to our kids. Because if you think about the test, ACT, the 2 subject areas where poor kids struggle, math and language arts. And there have been studies done in terms of the brain and the frontal lobe, which is your analytical, problem-solving, planning, organizing, your math part, and then also your temporal lobe, which is your memory, your language, and all of that. And as Phil talks about procedural self-talk, it's amazing because you got to be able to not only talk your way through it, you got to plan your process and process your plan. If you don't do that, you're never getting out.
Right.
We've been at this for how many years now? If you think about it, back in Lyndon Johnson in terms of the poverty, the war on poverty. And I remember a song, Bruce Hornsby, and some of you probably remember if you're of age. And there's a line that says, well, they passed a law in '64 to give those who ain't got a little more. I need you to help me out. That's just the way it is.
Phil?
Well, if you look at the trend line on the percentage of people in poverty after the Great War on Poverty, it did drop, but it stayed the same. It's right at 13, 14, 15% all the way through. So that really speaks to your point. I grew up in India. My folks are medical missionaries, and I spent my first 18 years there. And I was talking to one of my friends. I think the ratio of ox carts to motor vehicles was 75 to 1. Came back when I was 18. I'm what you call a third culture kid. They do research on us now, which explains a lot that we won't get into. I really came to understand what colonialism means, what rankism means, what it means to be a white person in India right after the end of the British Raj, and how much unearned privilege you have. And so when I came to this country, I saw poverty here, and I spent a number of years before I settled down working all kinds of jobs, getting sort of a tour of the American class system. And those things really helped me understand that there's talent and giftedness in everybody. And our job is to help people thrive and have the power they need, and to be engaged in the community in some way so that they have power in what happens next. So those are the things that I think are at the core of what I'm about.
I have spent my career funding programs or running programs, and programs are important and effective programs are important, but we can't program our way out of poverty. So I believe that we're due a systems change. And how do you suggest that we make that systems change happen?
Who are you asking?
Whoever has the best answer.
Well, I've never been a loss for words, so I'll take a stab at it. Really what's going on is I look at it in terms of we're trying to modify and change behaviors, but we haven't addressed the mindset. But in order to deal with the mindset, you got to give them a different frame of reference, how they filter information. And I went to Ohio State, and we're here, and most kids, I would say, middle-class, affluent kids, have probably been on Ohio State campus. There are a lot of kids here in Central Ohio who have never been on Ohio State's campus. We take them on field trips. Exposure is the key, which is what you focus on, and you got to get them to have a different frame of reference and how they process information. If you don't, we're going to be talking about this issue for the next 50 years, and nothing's ever going to get done. So you can't change a behavior unless you deal with the mindset. In order to deal with the mindset, you got to deal with the frame of reference. But particularly as cuts abound in terms of social services, education, the thing that they want to cut back on is exposure learning. And a lot of kids in poverty, abstract thinking is a struggle for them. Mm-hmm. You can't tell people to do something that they've never seen before. You got to show them. You got to expose them. And that's why I encourage a lot of people. It's great to look out, and there are different folks here from all walks of life, that you're here and you care about this subject. But I tell folks, you got to do more. We got to do more. If we don't do more, we're going to continue to have these problems over and over again, and they only get worse. They only get worse.
We really connect on this, and I've been looking at his book, and I think that we're going to have to partner up for sure. We call it the tyranny of the moment. And in this book, we understand that people are so pressed that they're in the concrete world. They have very little hope of getting into the abstract world, because they're always, bandwidth is completely focused on just getting it done.
That's good.
Right? So we have a theory of change that allows people who are living in chaos to actually go to the abstract so that they can think through what's going on, and so that they can't be taken advantage of. People that are in the tyranny of the moment are victims to all kinds of predators. The most obvious one would be a payday lender. So you have your paycheck doesn't make it from week to week and you're out of cash, you need cash right now, and your family and friends are tired of loaning you money, you go to the payday lender, he wants to loan you money, right? He just doesn't want you to read the back of the form. That's all abstract language, right? So you go for it, and then you find yourself in deep trouble. And every predator operates on the principle that you want a concrete solution to a concrete problem. And you don't have time to go to the abstract. And when we begin to value the abstract because we know we're vulnerable, then we can act differently and choose things differently and avoid those things from happening, and we can seek out education. I think what happens is education falls off the map for people that are in the tyranny of the moment. There's a study by Mullinoth on this. It came out in 2015. And people's IQ drops 16% when they're in the midst of that tunnel that they're in, right? And so you can gain that back. That's not a permanent loss, right? And so the value of learning suddenly happens in this, and all the agencies that people go to in our community want them to change the way they think and behave. And there's a treatment plan for every one of them, right? And it's all about getting to the abstract. But who is making the argument for you to do that? And if the argument is coming out of the caseworker's mouth or the therapist's mouth, that's a whole different thing than it coming out of your mouth. So we wait in getting ahead for people to make their own argument for change. And then we have to be there to support them. And that means institutions have to make changes. Our institutions set up all kinds of hassles for our clients. And our communities have to be there to support them. So we have a triple lens, we call it. The individual has to change, institutions have to change, communities have to change, and then finally, policy. And we have to do it all to make the systemic change.
How are we going to make that happen?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
When you talked about payday, and when you think about class subsets, I think about laws and what each class, how they function when it comes to laws. You think about the mega affluent, the law of compound interest, how everything comes back with a return. Their network, investing, everything, their legacy. It's all about compound interest, whereas the poor, they're punished by compound interest, and the middle class to a certain extent. Yeah. And then you have the traditional middle class, which is the law of diminishing returns. A lot of responsibilities, but too few resources to cover them. And then you have the poor, which is the law of unintended consequences. One thing, you call it the tyranny of the moment. It's perpetual crisis in poverty. There's always a crisis. Yeah. So how do you get them off that wheel? I know I met a gentleman here, Marcus Salter. He talked about mediation. Most people don't know this. Columbus is the #1 city in the state for evictions. And in the country, it's number 5. And they spend 70% of their income just on rent. So how do you get them to plan? Plan your process your plan. And if you don't develop that brain, I know it's very controversial to be able to impulse control, weigh consequences of decisions, the frontal lobe, you react instinctively, which is you base things on emotions. And that is your filter. That's how you make decisions based on how you feel. You got to be a principle-oriented person, and you got to do the right thing no matter if you feel like it or not.
I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Well, I'm feeling hopeful. Because I'm seeing communities in this state, there are 88 counties, and 30 of them have a Bridges initiative, and 20 of them are really doing great stuff, and 10 of them are doing fantastic stuff. And these are stretched across the country, and we're forming learning communities. And the idea is that if you can, in Oklahoma, you can figure out how the water fees penalize the poorest people in Muskogee the most, because it's a form of revenue, a source of revenue to add fees to people in poverty that have to turn their water off, then to turn the water on, and it goes on, and it generates all this money out of the pockets of the poorest people. If you can get the mayor of that city and the city council and those people trained in Bridges, and they go like, even though this is a source of revenue and we hate to give it up, we can see it's not fair. And what we find is in our communities, there are liberals and conservatives all engaged in Bridges. And when Gene and I interviewed all of them, we said, are you indeed in Oklahoma, do you have people from the left and right doing this work? And they go, yeah, we all care about poverty. Conservatives and liberals care about poverty. So at the table together. Then we asked them, well, when these issues come up And you've got to rearrange all your fee structure so that people in poverty don't get hit the hardest. Do the narratives of the left and right get in the way?
That's good.
And the answer was never. Because now they have a relationship with Mary Hicks in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And they know her, and they have a commitment to her, and the other people there too. And if you can take that kind of learning and just go across the country with all of our sites and begin to go, we can do policy. We can finally reach that place where we can have a bigger and bigger impact, because doing it one person at a time means that one person learns how to manage money, good, right? But what do we do with the rest of the system that's in place? So I have hope. I really do.
I do too.
So I get concerned, though, with the future of work and automation, and that we've been in this for 10 years, and we haven't budged since pre-Great Recession, that somehow it'll become our new normal.
Yeah, well, Gene got all over that. You know, in our book, you're going to have to read this, because that is a real threat. You know, yes.
Automation.
Yes, automation, yes.
Yeah, and we're just trying to get the poor to be stable. You know,
Yeah.
one of the things is, when, you know, most of the anti-poverty programs are facilitated by the middle class. So you can only take someone to your level of stability. You can't take them beyond that. You can only take them where you currently are. So we're just trying to get the poor to be stable. And the world is changing so fast, so rapidly. If you don't have a 21st century skill set to be able to adjust, you're going to be left behind for many, many years, if not decades or generations. So we've got to not only get them up to speed in terms of the structure, in terms of their foundation, but you got to get them to say, look, we got to move, and you got to do a full court press on this. You know, this is playoff time. Cavs play tonight, you know that, right? Hopefully you'll be watching it. Right. And we really got to really think about how we're going to do this strategically, because we're running out of time. I think the hourglass, we're running out of time. We got to move in order to get this.
I agree, and I think that in our communities, it's not just about helping people in poverty do better, because that's just accepted, right? We've got to do that. But community leaders have to think about being a community leader differently. You know, it's these kind of issues that community leaders need to really attend to, because if you're going to have this much poverty, you are not going to have a solid community. You cannot be a solid community with the levels of poverty that we have now or growing. And so that's what we mean by institutions have to change and communities have to change too. The whole mindset of the way we are approaching our communities and sustainability issues has just not reached the level of attention that it needs.
So you're one of our heroes in this space. You're really famous.
Oh.
Yes, you are. I'm so happy to be sitting with you.
Okay.
We have a room full of community leaders. So how can we lead differently? Because what we're doing isn't effective enough.
Well, Kathy McPherson, where are you? You better get busy training everybody in Bridges. Because here's the deal, we have to have a common language. And we have not talked about our core constructs. And we do it all through attraction. You know, our trainers have one day to get people to change the way they think. And it's amazing that in one day's time, everybody comes into the room with a mental model of what poverty is and what the world is about and how it works. And we love our mental models, man. You know, it's the last thing, you know, we want to give up. The last thing when we're dying is, no, my ideas, you know, right? So to get someone to change the way they're thinking about poverty is a big deal. And we're getting good at that. And we can, our trainers can do it in about 6 hours if people have an open mind. And then from there, it's about, well, why don't you find out what your sector has been doing? Because you have to apply the ideas. Well, you don't want to invent everything. So if the private sector is using our ideas to help their low-wage, entry-level employees stay on the job by stabilizing their environment and do it successfully enough, then their employees then actually become full-time employees, and they can, you know, all the good things happen from that. If the business sector is using this stuff, we'll introduce you to people in the business sector so that you can learn from them. If your hospital, if your courts, if your schools, if your colleges want to meet and talk to people that are using this and getting better outcomes, that is a fast track for learning. So we have people out there. We can introduce you to, people that are at the same level you are, to introduce you to the ideas and the bright things they've done. And then we say to you, Bridges isn't a program. It's a set of ideas. Right. So why don't you own the ideas and innovate with it? And you be the next champion, and have people come to you to learn how to do things. That's what I think will work.
Can I just add on that?
Yeah, quick,
we'll
have questions in a minute, so if we can move, people that are interested in asking questions can make their way to the microphone on the other side of the room. That would be great. And then, yes, please.
I think what he's saying is you got to have a holistic approach, and you got to start at the top, and you've got to really invest in people. And I think I work with a lot of organizations, nonprofits, and for-profit organizations. And my challenge to them is you got to do more than just give people paychecks and benefits. You got to improve the lives of your employees. And it's got to be wholesale. It's got to be holistic. And if you never do that, how are you ever going to be able to help the constituencies that you serve? So you got to have a holistic approach. And particularly with poverty, personal brokenness is a huge issue. It's a root cause. I know I see Sat Salinger, a coach, and there are so many issues with personal brokenness. The lack of fathers, the lack of positive guidance, the lack of vision, all of these things. If you never deal with the personal brokenness, you really never actually help the poor. And it's not just the poor. Even the middle class, we all have our shortcomings, which need to be addressed, which I think really speaks to the issue of holistic approach to helping people.
Your book looks fascinating, and one of the topics was how to help employers work with people who have multiple barriers to be successfully employed. What are some of those strategies?
Well, I think number one is get an idea, like you said, speaking their language, understanding. I think you have to have a grace, because one of the things, time, flexibility is a common hallmark of poverty. My wife gets with me all the time about that, But you've got to really allow yourself a certain amount of grace when you're working with the poor, because sometimes they will take 2 steps back before they take 1 step forward. So you got to really understand the poverty, but you also have to set boundaries and parameters as well. So I think really understanding them and giving them the skills and the tools that they need after you've established some stability to have them own how their life outcomes turn out. What is he talking about? There got to be some ownership here. In terms of owner versus a renter, you got to get them out of that equation from renting to owning. Ownership is very important in all aspects when it comes to assets, when it comes to skill set, whatever the case may be.
What are you most proud of?
The people that do the work. It's one thing to write the book, but it's the people who go through getting ahead that come back and help their communities. You can absolutely count on people in poverty wanting to help their communities. There is that philanthropy that goes on at that level. They're already doing so much for each other now. Mm-hmm. Nobody has ever calculated the value of what poor people do for each other. I took them in, they lived with me for 3 weeks. No one calculates that. No one calculates all the driving around and the fixing the cars and all that stuff. No one calculates that. They are philanthropists already, and they want to do good things in the community. That's how we recruit people to getting ahead. Do you want to help your community? So it's there. It's, the middle class is driven by achievement, right? People in poverty driven by relationships.
That's good.
And when you marry those two together, you get really good stuff.
Lawrence, what are you most proud of?
I think I made a vow that I was going to be better than my environment. And I know most people know me as a basketball player, but they don't know that I care much more about education than I ever did about sports. And I think getting my degree at Ohio State in business finance, and also going on and getting a master's degree, and really being a certified financial planner. Because I think when you become a financial planner, particularly certified, you see the value in being able to help people from a holistic perspective, which is how I wrote the book in all areas, investing, insurance, tax planning, or whatever, this book, and really helping people become free and liberated. Because even though people may be free, they're not emancipated, because they're still enslaved by all of the things that continue to hold them back from being successful. So I think I'm most proud of the fact that there's an area of the brain called the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. It's right here, high and off.
Like a doctor.
I know. It's high and off to the side. And I interviewed a neuroeconomist for my book. I didn't even know there was a such thing as a neuroeconomist. And he talked about how goal prioritization is critically important for helping the poor, or for any person. and being able to block out the background noises to accomplish your goal. With me, as a kid, as a poor kid who was told he would never amount to anything but being a kid from the projects, I knew if I focused on the task at hand and eliminated distractions, every goal I've wanted to achieve, I have. And I'm sure people in this room here have as well. So I think I'm most proud of being able to set a goal and to achieve it.
Great. It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. And in fairness to all, we'd like to get as many questions as possible, so please avoid editorial comments. Let's get started. First question, please.
Hi, Dave Parker, Root Strike Labs. I have to say quickly, Phil, I'd be in a lot of trouble if I didn't say hello to you from my mother. She had the great fortune of working with you years ago, Georgianne Parker. Please tell me you remember.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I have
Wonderful woman.
I have two questions, and they're related. One is, seems to me, if we're talking about a scarcity mindset and a poverty mindset, that a lot of the institutions that those that are in poverty rely upon and go to for support and help. Lawrence, you referenced social services, cuts and so on and so forth, that a lot of these institutions themselves may be working from a poverty mindset. So my question is, observations you have related to that, is there a relationship? And what you recommend and what you advocate might map over to the institutions?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So this thing I call the tyranny of the moment. I've often asked audiences like this, have you ever seen an institution in the tyranny of the moment? And they go, oh, yeah. Okay. Have you ever seen a community in the tyranny of the moment? They go, oh, yeah. So I have a little paper, and so if people in poverty will give up education because they're too busy solving problems, and it's, the abstract is not as important as getting through the day, well, you can check with your mom, because as her director at this addiction treatment place that I ran, and she worked for me, I always had money set aside for my staff's professional development. But when we had hard times, guess what I gave up? Right? Just like people in poverty give up education, I said to my staff, you're on your own, right? And so what do we do in our communities? We give up research and development, And then you take a look at what people in poverty do with their cars and so on. They're not maintaining them. It takes a lot of money and so on, so you just hope it keeps running, right? At the agency, we would give up, taking care of maintaining our equipment and so on. I was in an office the other day, an organization that the back end of the place was freezing cold because they didn't have the money to keep the heat on, right? And then at the other end, in our communities, what do? We give up our infrastructure, our roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff. So our institutions have to deal with this idea too. And I love this because people like to blame the poor for everything, And then we find ourselves behaving in the same way when it comes to these things.
Yes.
You need them. And Mr. DeVol had first touched upon the subject, which is currently in the news, of payday lending. And so in addressing that issue, legislation or education as your first step?
Well, in getting ahead, we do a little bit of financial education so people can be aware of all that. The next thing they want when they're done with getting ahead is financial literacy. And they're making the argument for it themselves, so they need to do it. But I think we can put payday lenders out of business. It's hard to legislate them out of business because, any laws you make are like a snow fence. It still snows through them. But the communities that are using our work, in Toledo, for example, they have 8 or 9 for-profit entities that have come together to stabilize the lives of their employees. And I won't go into the details, but one of those things is a small dollar loan program. And so you can get, the day you need it, you can get a loan up to $1,000. You end up paying 16% for it. You don't have to go to the payday lender, right? And your payment is calculated at something you can afford. So instead of going to the payday lender, you just go to the HR folks, say, hey, I need that loan, and bang. So there's 6 organizations, hospitals and for-profit entities in Toledo, 100% payback on these loans. Wow. You know, it is a gift to the employees. And when you do that and you expand that kind of concept, we can put payday lenders out of business.
Andrea.
Hi there. My name is Andrea Applegate. I'm with Applegate Talent Strategies. My bias is employment. I believe that the best anti-poverty program is a job. I am aware, though, with lots of experience working in job training, that we spend a whole lot of time, effort, money, energy training people for employment, and yet we do next to nothing to train employers on how to take job seekers. You've addressed this a little bit, but I would like you to talk about accountability and how we can hold employers in particular accountable for the decisions, the policies, the processes that they have in place that actually interfere with bringing stability to these workers.
Yeah, I think, that's a very challenging question, but I think for employers, they've got to be willing, because I think a lot of times they want to initiate change, but they don't want to change themselves, which is what he's talking about. And I think you got to really create a system in place when you talk about accountability, where you have metrics in place that hold employers accountable, not only for teaching people job skills, but also life skills. And I think really understanding, and as he said, I think the CEOs, managers, they need to be taught how to understand poverty, how to understand the dysfunction of poverty, because a lot of them have no clue. It doesn't make sense. Poverty doesn't make sense. It oftentimes kind of defies common sense when you think about it. I lived it. I know it. And if you don't have a system in place where you go through classes, you go through coursework to really understand, you're never going to really truly be able to help those folks, because you're not going to have the grace and the latitude that you need to be able to help them. And I think it's something that I challenge a lot of employers in this environment where jobs are plentiful, that you've got to really improve the lives of those who work for you. But at the same time, you've got to think about improving your own life as a manager, as a decision maker. And I think that's what your question really goes to. Thank you for that.
Can I add something? I think the catalyst in the future for our work is going to be the private sector. Because they have so many problems with retention rates, and turnover costs are killing them. So over here on the table, there's a piece of paper that has where to buy our books. And take a picture of it with your phone, and then you'll have it. And then there's a book there called Workforce Stability, and that is the training that we offer the employers. So we want a common language. So if the employers have this idea and they have these systems for strengthening and stabilizing their employees, and their employees have the same language, we're creating a new dynamic. And we have the capacity to do that now. So those books per sector are listed there, and then you can go check them out and learn from our learning community.
But you also said that they have to take ownership, and they've got to not just take the idea, but they've got to be part of the decision making.
That's right. Everyone has to they have to be attracted, one, then they have to take ownership next, right? Yeah.
As a new person in my role, I tried to meet with as many corporate partners as I could, and the number one concern without question was workforce.
Yeah.
And how to attract and retain employees. Doreen.
Hi, my name is Doreen Whitley-Rogers. I'm with United Way. That's why Lisa knows my name.
I'm glad you know mine.
My question is for Mr. DeVol. I'm really interested in the international application of your model. So as you work with different cities across the globe, what do you find that's similar in the solutions and both the barriers to poverty, and also any thoughts you have on the impact of a globalizing economy?
Good. Well, I was surprised that post-communist countries like Slovakia and the Czech Republic and so on would actually want an American solution, you know. In fact, I don't see people in those countries going, give us an American solution to poverty. But when they find out that the starting place is, if you go to the people in Courtice, you know, in Slovakia, and there they go through Getting Ahead, and they're defining what poverty is like in their city, then they're willing to accept the Bridges training for the people that surround them so you can build an initiative. So it actually starts with doing Getting Ahead. So It's being used in Canada and Australia, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Scotland. The folks in Scotland have really strong opinions about having it tweaked for themselves. They don't want American examples, you know. Just recently, I think we're going to be starting up with Uganda in Africa. English-speaking countries there are beginning to show an interest. So it's just like people want to do something with this. I can't really speak to the globalized economy. I can't speak to that. I just know that I feel for Americans who lost their jobs, you know, and I think that's a real concern in this country. And I think that we should be looking after each other in a different way, and we should look at full-time employment instead of the kind of jobs that people are working today. 1, 2, or 3 part-time temp jobs, you know, completely unstable work periods. I mean, those kind of jobs are just killers. And so we need to be pushing our employers and ourselves to actually offer full-time jobs where a person belongs. They're important there. They have a future there. Those are the kind of jobs we should really be pushing for.
Can I add on that? You asked the question about what can employers do. I think really got to look at your mission statement. It really has got to go to your values. One thing we didn't talk a lot about, and I usually always do, is the value system. So your values are your guiding principles that shape daily decisions, actions, and activities. And I really think they might have to redo their value statement as well in terms of what they offer and really take them to task on that. Because I think if you don't have a value system, by default, that is your value system. Particularly working with the poor, you got to get them to take ownership of their values. And I think for employers or organizations, the same way as well. You got to really think about, what do you really value? What is your mission? What's your reason? What's your existence as a business? What's your legacy? What's your vision going to be? And you need to hold people to task on that. And there has to be targeted time that you take out to be able to get people to understand. And it's knowledge accumulation is critically important, but also application, which is the wisdom part.
We have time for one more question.
Can I just add something?
Yes, you may.
That made me think about this. You know, we think that people in poverty need to make changes, but we haven't really attended to what we in comfortable middle-class environments have to do. We're just happily moving along. We're living in a very blessed place. And you're really asking us to recheck that. You're saying, what are your values, you know? And how do you benefit from this? And how did you get where you are, you know? And the same thing with wealthy people, right? So we really look at it as we're just not about having people in poverty change. Everybody has to understand the dynamics of these class issues.
That's good.
One more question.
Great point.
Thank you. I'm Dave Noble with VoiceCore. We're a reading service for people who are blind and visually impaired. Recently, we've discovered that statistically there are 42,000 individuals in the metropolitan area who could be using our service because they cannot read due to some kind of disability, predominantly vision loss. Our concern is that they are either already in poverty or falling into it because of the vision loss. Are there things that you've mentioned in your books that we might be able to share with our audience that would help them as a person with a vision loss or another disability that prevents them from reading it? Where should we point them first?
Well, when people go through Getting Ahead, we know that some people can't read. So the group takes turns reading. Half of the learning in Getting Ahead is in the content itself, and the other half is in the conversation. So people who can't see or have those kind of disabilities can be part of the conversation. And most of the learning takes place in those deep conversations. I mean, that's really the joy of it. Even so, I got an email, and I thought, I wonder if you were the one that wrote to me, about, I don't know technology well enough, but there must be some way that a written piece can be read to people.
Translate it.
And they asked me, do you have that capability? Well, I don't even know what it is. So I'll look into that and see what it takes to make that possible. And if you know, come and see me afterwards and make my education quicker.
Disabilities and also coupled with poverty, I mean, that's something that I didn't really address that, but that's something that is a great question that we really got to think about. I think you have to have advocates, because anyone who has a disability, you have to have some type of advocate to actually help them, to coach them. So there has to be a system in place where you have advocacy folks to be able to help them. So that's a great one. You got me on that. You got me on that one.
As I reflect on today's conversation, 2 words come to mind, and that is thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you for offering such sound advice. I'm not sure that my team is going to be ready for me when I get back to work, because I have so many things in my mind now to think about how can we do things a bit differently. So again, thank you. Thank you. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide, through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please help me thank our sponsor, the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Thank you so much. And let's also thank our wonderful speakers, Phil DeVol, Lawrence Funderburke, and our own Lisa Courtice. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again at CMC next week. Have a great day.